This morning's legislative breakfast is going to take a closer look at Minnesota's November economic forecast that was just released a week ago. Minnesota Management and Budget prepares formal forecasts of state revenues and expenditures in November and February each year as required by state law. This forecast information is used by the Governor and Legislature to ensure that enacted budgets remain on track and in balance and to plan for future budgets. This forecast information is also used by bond rating agencies and other financial analysts to review the state's financial health, and by the media who present information on the state's financial conditions to the public. The Economic Analysis Division provides periodic forecasts of state revenues. Economic forecasts are issued in February and November of each year, and economic updates are issued in January, April, July, and October of each year. This morning, Minnesota Management and Budget Commissioner Steve Sviggum is here to discuss the most recent economic forecast and provide us some insight as to the inner workings of the Minnesota Management and Budget Division. We are very pleased to have him with us today. Steve received a BA in mathematics from St. Olaf College and later worked as both a teacher and farmer, as well as a Minnesota legislator. He was first elected to the Minnesota House in 1978. He ascended to the position of Speaker following the 1998 elections, where the Republican Party took control of the House. He held this position until 2007, when the DFL regained control. Also in 2007, Governor Tim Pawlenty asked Steve to fill the position of Commissioner of Labor and Industry. And last month, Governor Pawlenty asked Steve to be Commissioner of Management and Budget, replacing previous Commissioner Tom Hansen. This morning, he will shed light on the implications for the state with the recent release of the November forecast and what challenges lie ahead for the Governor and Legislature with a projected $6.2 billion shortfall for the next biennium. So please join me in welcoming Commissioner Steve Sviggum.
Thank you, Danette. I appreciate the chance to be here with you this morning because it feels like home. For 15 years, between being a minority leader and speaker, I had a chance to be here with you with the leadership breakfast and the leadership discussion. So coming to Twin West and the reputation that you have as a chamber, a leading chamber in the state, certainly makes this a wonderful place for me to be this morning. Steve and Keith and Lynn, let me tell you that your service is really, really great to the state of Minnesota. My good friend Terry, I've had a chance to meet you for the last 4 years, and you've become a very, very good friend, and I respect you tremendously. But especially today, I want to mention two people, legislators that are here. Sarah. Did Sarah leave now? She left. Good. She knew I was going to mention her. And Speaker Zellers. Both Sarah and Speaker Zellers, nobody else in this room knows this, but I hired both of them to work, well, actually, I worked for them after I hired them for a number of years. And Kurt, I'm very, very proud that we worked together, that you told me what to do for many years, along with Sarah telling me what to do, and now you'll be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. I just feel really, really proud about that. And feel very, very good yourself, as well as should the Twin West Chamber. This morning, if I could, I'm going to do three things. I'm going to give you a little perspective of where we are in Minnesota. Speak to you a little bit about the budget forecast, Senator. You know more about it than I do, so I'm not going to try to be somebody I'm not. And then lay out some options for the state of Minnesota that I asked my assistant commissioner to put on a sheet of paper. These are not options from management and budget, from MMB. I need to let you know that. We will deal with only with numbers and with facts from my department, from my agency. We will let the politicians deal with the decisions and the policy decisions, the numbers decisions that will be necessary in this next session. But I thought it would be good for you to at least see some of the perspective of where these people will be making very, very difficult decisions in the upcoming 2-4 years. A story. Back home on the farm, I'm a farmer, as Danette told you. Some of you probably came from the farm. Farmer Swenson went off fishing for a week. So he goes off fishing for a week up north with his wife, comes home, And he comes home, and his son meets him at the mailbox at the end of the driveway. He says, "Dad," says, "oh, it's terrible. It's just terrible," he said. "While you were gone, we had this great big rainstorm, 10 inches of rain, water all over, washed right through the cow yard, took every cow, every hog we've got, washed them down the river." Farmer Swenson was just devastated. He just dropped his shoulders and he started to cry. Everything was gone that he'd worked for his whole life. And finally he looked at his son and he says, "What about the Broughtons next door?" "Oh yeah, Dad, took everything they had to. You know, went right through the cow yard, right through the hog barn, took every hog, every pig they got, took every cow, washed down the river. They're devastated too. They got nothing." And he said, "What about the Nessets right next door to them, further down a mile?" "Oh, Dad," he said, "they're gone too. The whole works is gone. Cows, pigs, the whole works is gone. Nessets are devastated too." Farmer Swenson kind of bucked up a little bit and he says, "Well, it ain't so bad then," he said. "You know, if we're all in this together, all of a sudden the feeling is it ain't so bad. Everything's okay. We can make it." That perspective, that story, should be looked at in the states in this country. Senator, I'm sorry I didn't mention you, David. I see you sitting there. Good, glad you're here. That story should be brought around in a perspective of where the states are in this country. Except for a couple of states that are energy rich. Our neighbor to the north, North Dakota, Oklahoma, states that have energy, are energy-rich states. Every state is in a very difficult financial situation, as Minnesota is. Many states much worse than Minnesota. There are many states right now, and it's tough to get this perspective around the country, and I don't know if it's like Farmer Swenson, it makes you feel any better and you can buck up or not. But like Farmer Swenson or like Minnesota, things are better in Minnesota than most states in the country. There are states that are having to look at their budgets right now and make adjustments to their budget right now as we sit in these chairs. Very significant adjustments. In Minnesota, and I think we should celebrate what is good in Minnesota. Our employment growth in Minnesota is better than most states. It's one of the charts you have in front of you that shows the employment growth in our state of Minnesota. The wage growth in Minnesota is better than most in other states. While the wage growth around the country is about 1.5% for those who are employed, Minnesota it's about 3.5%. We were able to announce with the budget forecast last week that Minnesota does not have a deficit. In this current biennium, we don't have a deficit. We don't have to worry about short-term borrowing. We don't have to worry about the potential of on-allotment and all the negative things that come with on-allotment. Other states are looking at having to do that. Minnesota does not. In fact, today, we're going to announce that the November revenue take was actually up another $40, $50 million. So that $399 figure you see there on your sheets for the surplus of this current biennium will actually increase a little bit with the revenue take in November. In Minnesota, we should celebrate the things that are good. And it's better in Minnesota than it is other states. That doesn't mean it's great. That doesn't mean we don't have significant work to do. That does not mean we don't have unfinished business in the state. It does not mean that the decisions before these decision makers are going to be extremely, extremely difficult. But the fact is, if you can put it in perspective, like Farmer Swenson did, if you can put it in perspective, Minnesota is far, far better off than most states in this country, unless they happen to have great energy resources from which to draw from. I think that's a perspective that we should celebrate as people, as Minnesotans. The revenue forecast was announced last week on Thursday. And the revenue forecast, first of all, there wasn't a lot of new surprises in it. In government, in state government, if there's only swings of $300 or $400 million, we don't consider that to be big surprises. The big surprises are when you get the billion-dollar swings, all of a sudden you start working with extra zeros, and it kind of blows my mind working with those numbers of zeros, but in fact the $400 million swing is not great big surprise. When you look at the revenue forecast, you can say that in this biennium, as we are sitting right now, we actually have black ink. We have black ink right now. Don't have to worry about on allotment, don't have to worry about those difficult things of making a legislature start in January, which they have done in the past, and having to make significant adjustments right away when they meet in January. But you look also at the budget forecast, and you know that Minnesota has some difficulties. In the long term, coming out into the next biennium, which is the 2012-13 biennium, and the biennium after that, 2014-15 biennium, as we start dealing with the 4 years, we have some structural deficits, which are huge, and some very, very difficult decisions before the legislature and the Governor-elect Dayton, that they will have to make. The reason for that is that we have been living in Minnesota on one-time cuts, federal stimulus money, borrowed monies. We have been living for the last couple of years in a situation that we haven't necessarily out of our general fund been paying the bills. We've been paying the bills by doing some pushing off in the next biennium, borrowing some money, and getting some federal stimulus money. Now, most of you probably realize that with the change in Washington, D.C., and appropriately so, the feds are not going to be giving us a stimulus package this year as they did last year. That kind of $5 billion that came into Minnesota, about $2.4 million into our general fund, that reduced our general fund spending, even though we kept up our spending overall, the general fund spending was reduced. That's not going to be there again. Appropriately so, because the feds, when they passed that stimulus budget a year ago, said this is going to be money to tide you over until the economy improves. Well, the economy isn't improving quite as fast as we hoped it would be improving. It's improving, but the line of improvement has been dropped. So we're heading in the right direction. It's just not in the right direction quite as much as we anticipated. When you look at the revenue forecast, we can see over the next biennium, at least at this point, with the expectation that the revenues in the state of Minnesota will be growing by 5%. That's right. These legislators, senators, representatives before you, will have 5% new money revenues in the next biennium than they had in the last biennium. The difficulty exists that the spending expectations are 27.5% higher. 5% doesn't meet 27.5%. It doesn't meet. There's a significant gap. That's the structural deficit that has to be addressed. Now, again, with numbers you can do anything you want to, and it's absolutely true that politicians can stand before you. And some say, well, that deficit that we're going to be facing in the next biennium shouldn't be $6 billion. It should be $7.5 if you include automatic inflation. If you agree to the fact that government should automatically grow from year to year to year, automatic inflation, you can argue that that deficit in the next biennium could be $7.5 billion. You can make that argument. You could also argue just as well, any politician standing before you, that that $6 billion deficit, or 6.2 I think is what we announced, could be downwards of $3 billion. You could argue that if you don't do the school payback of the $1.4 billion, if you make Governor Plenty's one-time cuts permanent, he made on allotments, as you probably remember last year, one-time cuts. The legislature failed to make them permanent. That could be anywhere between $800 million and $1 billion. You can get that number down to just over $3 billion. Now, politicians can do that and with a straight face make a rational argument for either. The fact is that there is some structural deficit that has to be handled in the out biennium. I should also first make sure that you understand when I say spending is is expected to go up 27.5%. That's from 30 billion to 38 billion. From 30 to 38, about 27.5%. Now, the reason it's 30 is because that's just general fund money. Remember I told you we got about 2.4 billion of federal money, the one-time cuts, the education shift that we delayed some payment to schools. That reduced last biennium's general fund spending to about $30 billion. That's not going to be there, so that's why the big jump from 30 to 38. While I'm saying the general fund spending increase will be 27.5%, the total spending in the state is probably going to go up only about 6.6%. That's estimated to be 6.6%. The difference being the federal money, the one-time cuts, the education shifts. So you can see that there is significant work that has to be done on a structural basis in Minnesota. My line at the news conference last Thursday when I announced that is that we've played our cards in Minnesota. For those of you who happen to enjoy a game of cards occasionally, a game of poker, our cards have been played. We don't have many more cards to play. We're not going to draw cards from the federal government with a federal stimulus package. They don't have the money. They said it was going to be a one-time fix. So our cards have been played. That makes the decisions before these people extremely difficult. Without taking a position, 3 years ago I would have had to take a position. Today, these folks have to take a position. I don't have to. In fact, I should not, as commissioner of MMB, I should not take a position. If I get too far into advocacy, Kristen is going to step on me and make sure that I don't go do that. In fact, she made very, very sure when we looked at the options, she said, Steve, she says, I'll give you some options before us, but I'm not going to put MMB on the sheet. I'm not going to do that. And I respect and understand that. So if you would just, for a perspective, look at the decisions before. And by the way, this is not an all-inclusive list. This is a very, very short list. There are hundreds, no, there are thousands of other options before the legislators. But these are some talked about options that might be before them, either from the spending side or from the revenue side. You can see from the revenue increase as some type of gaming activity. By the way, I think these numbers tend to be a little bit conservative, very honestly. But some type of gaming activity would bring in some hundreds of millions of dollars. Sales tax on services, I'm very sure that our accountants here, this includes, by the way, all services. Consumer services, business-to-business services. So it would include everything from lawyers to accountants, from health care to cosmetology, from dog grooming to, you name it, every service, business to business or consumers would be included in that $5.3 billion. That would be extending that sales tax to all those services. Now, most plans who have brought, legislators who have brought forward this item in the past have generally said we need to broaden our sales tax because we've become such a service-oriented society. Over 40, 50, 60 years ago, we were more goods then. Now we're more service-oriented. But they usually say when we broaden our sales tax or propose broadening our sales tax, we're going to reduce the rate. You know, reduce the rate by a point or a point and a half or 2 points down to 4.5%, whatever it may be. This $5.3 billion assumes that the rate would stay the same, which it certainly would not do. Sales tax on clothing, you can see, is $560 million. Suppose we were going to do a 10% income tax surcharge. I think that was done when we had the budget difficulties back in about 1982. Lynn, would you remember? Was 84? I think we had a temporary 1 year 10% surcharge at that time on all incomes. There's a discussion about returning to pre-income tax rates pre-1999 when the rates were reduced for all three income brackets. Of course, Governor-elect Dayton has talked about the tax fourth income tier. Minnesota's top income tier right now is at 7.85%. Governor-elect Dayton, in his, to his credit, on the campaign stump, talked about a fourth tier going to 10.95%. As you know, Chuck, Brad, that would just be another 3%, you know, on high income. You know that's another 3%? No, it's another 40%, Chuck. 40, yeah. It's 3 points, but it would be a 40% increase on anybody making more than $130,000. You see what alcohol, cigarettes would raise there, and a temporary 1/2 cent sales tax. From a revenue side, those are some of the options before our legislators. There are whole hosts of others. This is just some of them. And from the expenditure side, now things get pretty tough because any decision you make on the revenue side, my guess is you're going to create a lot of enemies. My guess is also if any decision you make, Kurt, on the expenditure side, you're going to make a lot of enemies. So the bottom line to you, Speaker, is you're going to make a lot of enemies. No matter what you do, there are going to be people in this room that are going to be upset with you. And might be that if everybody's upset, you might be doing the right thing. Speaking from experience. I always felt, history, Jeff, to tell you the truth, I always felt when I had the 5% on this end of my butt and the 5% on this end of my butt, I was doing the right thing. I had that feeling. And by the way, that did happen to me a couple of different times when I was in your position. Looking at the expenditure side, maintain the education shift, $1.4 billion we would save by doing that. By the way, I'm going to tell you that's going to happen. That's going to happen. In 1980, when we borrowed money from the schools, I think it took us 9 years to pay it off. In 1992, when we borrowed the same shift to the schools, I think it took us 10 years to pay it off. In 2003, we did the same thing. We paid it off in about 1.5 years. That's because the economy, if you remember, came back so quickly in 2003 and 2004. To expect to pay that back, that shift back in 1 year is unreasonable. And I'm going to guess that that first bullet is going to be on everybody's list, even though they will speak against it and they'll pontificate against it. It's going to happen. One-time cuts, that's the governor's one-time on allotments. I'm reading the second bullet on the second page now. Had they been made permanent, the governor's on allotments, that would have saved somewhere between the $800 and $1 billion. There's a discussion about the early enrollment into MA. Governor-elect Dayton has said he would do that. By the way, the $384 million of state funding that would cost is built into the budget. That's in the $6.2 billion deficit. So if he chooses not to early enroll in MA, you could back 384 out of there. 10% state agencies operations, about 380 million. One thing I'm going to, and this is just going to be from being a commissioner at both labor and industry as well as MMB in the last 3 years. We've stretched our state employment workforce rather significantly. We've reduced the full-time equivalents rather significantly. In fact, even though we've added significant programs over the last 8 years, there's going to be no more state employee FTEs when Tim Pawlenty leaves office than when he began office 8 years ago. Exactly the same number, no more, even though we put different burdens and different responsibilities and different programs. I'm going to make this comment to the legislators as well as to you. Rather than just look at saying the departments need a 10% reduction or 15% reduction and you got to do the same amount of programs with less money, I think you have to start making the tough decisions and tell the departments, the agencies, the state, what programs not to do. I think we are to that point. Buck up and tell them if you're going to not fund the departments any further and you're going to make reductions, tell them what you don't want them to do. In labor and industry, it may be, don't do child labor investigations, which is funded from the general fund. I understand that, but rather than just say, you got to do the child labor investigations, we're not going to give you any money, tell them you don't want to do it. Maybe on the highways out here, the highway helper program, the yellow trucks you see drive by and drive by. Rather than just cutting funds that they don't have, tell them, eliminate the highway helper program. I think we've come to the point, and I can go on and on and on, I think we've come to the point where you need to tell the state, as decision makers, what programs you don't want them to do, rather than just cut any budgets and say you still have to do all the programs. I think we've come to that point. LGA, county aid, GA, GAMC, by the way, we're one of, I think, only 8 states that fund general assistance, GAMC. It's totally a state-funded program. We get no federal funds from that. And then you can look at some of the education categories. And the last one, I just played in there, ethanol subsidies. I think there's about $30 million left in that pot as well that would be there for the next years. As you can see, no matter what decisions are made amongst reasonable, balanced, common ground, people trying to find common ground, the decisions are going to be very, very tough. And I just wanted you to be aware of that, be recognizing of the fact that decisions are tough, and understand that these 6 legislators here, Steve, Lynn, Terry, Kurt, they have some really, really tough decisions to make. And I would hope that you would be aware of the difficulty of their decisions. So I'm going to stop there. And hopefully, Kristen, hopefully I didn't put any special direction from what I would do if I was there. And I saved MMB from any embarrassment. So with that. So, yeah. Okay. Yell it out, and I'll repeat it. Danette gets the first question, yeah. That comes with being chair, doesn't it?
So one question I have, you talked about the early MA option, which Governor-elect Dayton has said that he will do, and that's $384 million that was put into the budget. If that were not done, so if the state chose not to take that money, there's also then federal matching money that would go away as well.
Yes.
So how much is the federal matching money tied to the 384?
The 384 is state money only that is there in this current biennium. The federal money that is anticipated to be matched with that is about $1.4 billion. So about 4 times as much, Danette, would be there if Governor Dayton chooses to do the early enrollment in the medical assistance program, the early MA enrollment. The decision, I think, by law, he has to make by January 15th. Kristen, is that right? He has to make that decision by 15th, although I think he has indicated, at least during the last month's debate, that he would do that. I don't know if looking at these numbers is going to change his mind or not, but he's indicated he would do it.
So one follow-up question. So if there's that $1.4 billion in that matching money, does that help lower the $6.2 billion?
Not at all. Nope. The $1.4 billion does not interact with the $6.2 billion deficit. It will not reduce that. It's just additional Fed funds that come to serve different individuals that would qualify. So that federal money will not reduce the deficit at all.
Do folks have questions that they want to raise their hand and then shout out?
Questions? Yeah, Chuck? Here.
Mine's more of a last question.
Oh. Let's make sure we don't get back to that one. Well, obviously it's negative. To the effect it's negative, we would have to know, we have an economist by the name of Dr. Tom Stinson who does all that adjustments for us. I could not give you a particular number in relationship to 1,000 jobs. I assume 1,000 jobs depends upon the types of job they are, the permanency of the job, the wage growth of the wage of the different jobs. So I could not specifically say that. Can you, Kristen, respond to that better than I? Yeah. I'm sure Dr. Stinson has some type of standard, some type of rule of thumb. I don't know what it is. It's that Unfortunately, I will tell you that's beyond me. I'm Farmer Swenson. Yes. Can I make sure I have the right table? Is it the one with the revenues 904 million below? Sure. Interesting chart there. We do recognize that that growth of our revenues are going to continue to increase. As I mentioned, their revenues are going to increase 5% in the next biennium. However, they're not increasing as quickly as anticipated by the last forecast of last February. So when you see that parentheses around the 904 million, that basically means that there was an adjustment from the last forecast to this one, $904 million worse in relationship to the job, wage growth, employment growth as anticipated from last February. This is forecast to forecast. So again, we're growing. We're not growing just quite as fast as we had anticipated previously. What insights do I have? Well, it tells me that the economy is growing. It tells me we're not growing quite as fast as we anticipated. It tells me that the agreed to a deal between President Obama and the Republicans in Washington, D.C. Better pass. From an economic standpoint, from an economic growth standpoint, I will tell you that these numbers, if that package were to pass, and I guess the House Democrats are bucking it, the Senate Democrats are saying, okay, we don't like everything, but it's an agreement. These numbers will be much better if that agreement between President Obama and the Republicans pass. It'll be much better. Correct, Kristen? Good. You keep nodding your head up and down. That's good. Other questions? Keith? Anything? You're the tax man. Yeah, right. Okay, Chuck.
You know, I've been a fan for 25 or more years of yours, and particularly appreciated your willingness to take on some of those climb the mountain issues that weren't necessarily popular, your support of ethics and your support of clean campaigns. So I'm a fan here asking you a tough question. One is, as you reflect on the totality of your career, what is the thing that you're most proud of? And number two, what is the thing that didn't happen that ought to have happened during your watch over a quarter of a century? Take 30 seconds.
Okay. This is not going to be in depth. You should have pre-warned me of this. I'm going to say the thing that I was most proud of. I believe you need to bring people together. I'm one of those folks that knows you can't govern from here and you can't govern from here. You can't govern from either 5%. You got to govern to the balance of the citizens of the state. Looking back to the years that I had the good opportunity to represent you in the legislature, I would say the most challenging times were in 1999, 2000, 1 and 2, when we had an independent governor, a Democratic Senate, and a Republican House, many of which did not like each other. In fact, Kurt, in our own caucus, we had many who didn't like each other in our own caucus. And working with a wonderful, and I mean a wonderful leader by the name of Roger Moe at that time. And Jesse could be very charming, and he could be very paranoid at times too. But being able to bring together and finish at times, even though there were a couple special sessions, finish during those times when you had that tripartisan government, different peoples, great different philosophies, and still being able to find the common ground to move ahead in the best interest of Minnesota. I think that would have been probably the best times. And Chuck, now I'm going to play to you. The worst time, the thing I should have done, in 2006, when we passed the Gopher Stadium, the Twin Stadium, we should have done the Viking Stadium at the same time. I have this feeling, I had that feeling in 2006 that stadiums, you know, stadiums are nothing. They mean nothing compared to health and human services and education. You can't compare the two. You just can't. But also, I don't want the Vikings to be termed the Los Angeles Vikings. That doesn't sound good to me. So I thought in 2002, we knew we had to do something with the Twins. We had to do something. The Twins were going to leave. Poled was going to sell them. We had to do something, and no matter what you do, people are going to be upset. I recognize that. But I thought 2 stadiums would be enough to sink us. I thought that would sink us, so I didn't want to take on the third. We should have done all 3 at one time and just bit the bullet. So, thank you. Thank you for your kindnesses.
All right, Commissioner Sviggum, I just want to say thank you so much for your over 30 years of service to the people of Minnesota and your continued service. You've been a great leader, and we thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Before we have a couple more things just want to cover. So next Friday, not next Friday, I'm not ready for that. A month from now, January 14th, 7:30 here, our next legislative breakfast. We will have bring our legislative leadership to you for our session preview, which will be fabulous. So please join us there. And also wanted to let you know, Gala is right around the corner. So March 11th, Friday, March 11th, we will again have our annual Gala celebration here at the DoubleTree. We do have early bird tickets on sale for $75 until January 15th, at which time they go up to $85. At any time, if you buy 10 tickets, you do get 2 free. And our theme this year is Riverboat Mavericks. So we will be having lots of fun little riverboat gambling, all on the up and up from an agency standpoint. We've covered that all. So, but anyway, so again, and I want to thank our sponsors, Comcast, Pan America, Politics in Minnesota and Capitol Report, West Health, Swank Audio Visual. So that concludes our program. Thank you so much again to our keynote, Commissioner Sviggum, and all of the legislators who joined us here today. Have a great weekend.